Throughout World War II, Urban served with the 60th Infantry Regiment, 9th Infantry Division. He fought in 6 campaigns in Europe and the Mediterranean, including Operation Torch that began November 8, 1942, in North Africa, service for which he earned 2 Silver Stars. Urban fought in Sicily and Germany, too. But he earned his Medal of Honor for his actions in France and Belgium in the summer of 1944. On June 14, 1944, 6 days after landing at Normandy with the 2nd Battalion, then Captain, Urban started a remarkable run of heroic leadership and personal bravery. His unit, Company F, was being decimated by heavy enemy small arms and tank fire near Rewrote, France. Urban knew he had to act quickly, so he picked up a bazooka and moved toward 2 enemy tanks. Urban worked his way through hedgerows despite a continuing barrage of fire. When he got close enough, he popped into the enemy's view and fired the bazooka, destroying both tanks. His actions allowed his company to move forward and take out the rest of the enemies in the area, earning him a Bronze Star. Later that afternoon, Urban was hit in the leg by a 37mm tank gun when Company F was near the town of Orglands. However, he refused to be evacuated and continued to lead his unit until they were able to move into defensive positions for the night. At 5 a.m. the next day, Urban remained with his company and directed another attack, even though he was badly wounded. He was injured again during that battle and evacuated to England. Urban arrived at the 2nd Battalion's command post to find that his unit had left within the hour to attempt to break through German defenses in the area. Limping from his leg wound, Urban made his way to the unit and retook command. As he did so, Company F was having trouble moving forward. 2 supporting Allied tanks had been destroyed, while another that was still intact wasn't moving because it had no commander or gunner. Urban found a lieutenant in charge of the tanks and began directing a plan of attack. However, that lieutenant and a fellow soldier were immediately killed as they tried to mount the remaining tank. So, Urban, knowing how crucial it was to get that tank moving, dashed through enemy fire despite his bad leg and mounted the tank himself. Even though bullets ricocheted all around him, Urban ordered the tank forward and, using its machine gun himself, delivered devastating fire back on the enemy. The battalion's soldiers took notice of his bravery and leadership, and it galvanized their courage. They were able to attack and destroy the enemy position. Tasked with finding a point to cross the Meuse River near here, Belgium, however, the Germans were hoping to stop the Allied advance there. They were waiting with a heavy concentration of their own forces. As the 2nd Battalion moved toward the crossing point it had located, they were held back by fierce enemy artillery, small arms, and mortar fire. Urban moved quickly from his command post to the battalion's lead position and reorganized the attacking elements. He then personally led the charge toward the enemy's strongpoint. As the men moved across open terrain, Urban was hit in the neck, a life-threatening injury that tore out one of his vocal cords. Urban could barely talk above a whisper, but he still refused to be evacuated until his men had won the battle and secured the crossing point over the river. Urban's courage and extraordinary actions became legendary to the soldiers in his battalion, as well as among the enemy. In fact, he'd earned the nickname, the Ghost, from the Germans because he kept coming back to the fight. Army doctors gave Urban no hope for survival once he was finally evacuated from the battlefield, but he recovered undeterred by their prognoses, even though his vocal cords remained damaged and left him with a permanent raspy voice. Urban was promoted to the rank of major in October 1944. He became a lieutenant colonel before medically retiring from the army in February 1946. Urban moved to Port Huron, Michigan, where he served for several years as the town's recreation and community center's director. During the 1960s, he met his wife, Jenny, and they had a daughter, Jennifer. In 1972, the family moved to Holland, Michigan. According to Cornell University, Over the course of his civilian career, Urban coached several sports programs and trained athletes who became Olympians and Golden Glove champions. He was eventually appointed the chair of the Michigan Olympic Boxing Committee. Reviewed the Medal of Honor recommendation and agreed. More than 35 years. After that summer in 1944, Urban was notified he would be awarded the nation's highest military honor for valor. He received it on July 19, 1980, from President Jimmy Carter during a ceremony at the White House. It was attended by his wife and daughter, as well as hundreds of his fellow 9th Infantry Division soldiers. Urban's other awards include the Croix de Guerre with Bronze Star from France, the Belgian Fourragère and 7 Purple Hearts for the wounds he suffered throughout the war. All of his accolades make him one of the most decorated soldiers in U.S. history, on par with famed Army Major Audie Murphy. The wounds. He was wounded a total of 7 times in the war and received 7 Purple Hearts, yet consistently refused evacuation until he absolutely had to be carried off the battlefield. The medals. He received a total of 29 awards and decorations, the highest being the Medal of Honor, which was belatedly awarded in 1980 by President Jimmy Carter, decades after the war. Urban's actions were not a single act, but a sustained, relentless campaign of unbelievable bravery and leadership that inspired his entire unit. He was, to put it mildly, the soldier you'd want covering your 6. Matt Urban, a great soldier and teach others soldiers never lose your confidence or feel you are powerful and deals every hard condition. Matt Urban always remembered in history. The ending story of Matt Urban's combat career in World War II culminated with his 7th and final wound on September 3, 1944, near Philippeville, Belgium, while his battalion was advancing toward the Meuse River crossing. Here are the key details of that final action and his life afterward. Final battle action. Urban, then a captain commanding the 2nd Battalion, personally led a charge across open ground against a German strongpoint, exposing himself to intense enemy fire. Midway through the assault, he was shot in the neck by an enemy round. Refusal to be evacuated. Though the wound was severe, he was unable to speak above a whisper and was administered his last rites by a priest on the scene. He refused to be evacuated until his men had secured the crossing point. Aftermath and post-war life. He ultimately survived, but the bullet permanently damaged his larynx, leaving him with a raspy voice for the rest of his life. He was promoted to major in October 1944 and then lieutenant colonel, before being medically retired from the Army in February 1946. Urban returned home to Michigan, where he spent his civilian career working as a recreation and community centers director in cities like Port Huron, Monroe, and Holland. He was belatedly awarded the Medal of Honor by President Jimmy Carter in 1980, after the recommendation paperwork, which had been lost, was finally found. Matt Urban died in 1995 from complications due to a collapsed lung, consequence of one of his war wounds, and is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. It's an incredible conclusion to a record of valor that earned him the title of one of the most decorated American soldiers of the war.